Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining another episode of Leadership Matters with Dr. Sharon. I am Dr. Sharon H. Porter, educator, author, entrepreneur, and speaker. And tonight we have a wonderful, wonderful educator in educational leadership. She is Robin Y. Green. She is originally from the Washington, D.C. area, Maryland specifically. She's currently in Charlotte, North Carolina, serving as a learning community administrator. I hope I got that right. She's a graduate of A&T State University as well as UNC Charlotte. And I cannot be more excited to have Miss Robin Green. Robin, welcome to Leadership Matters.
Thank you, Dr. Sharon. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And so I gave just a little bit about you, but please take this opportunity to share with our viewers a little more of who Robin Y. Green really is.
Sure. Robin Y. Green. And so one thing I want to begin with is when you stopped at the portion about the learning community administrator, that typically gets people because those words together, people kind of put their own definition of what that means. And they typically hear the community part. Well, in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, we are divided into areas, zones, and now they are called learning communities. And so I serve the students within two of the learning communities of CMS. There's about 22 schools that I serve, and in my role as a learning community administrator, I actually support our school administrators in facilitating the discipline processes and protocols. Also, I have the opportunity to work with school leaders through professional development opportunities, as well as with the actual community at large to support our students in making better decisions within the schools. That's a little bit about me professionally, but personally, I do want to add that I am one of three children, and I'm proud to say that I'm a middle child. People have a connotation about middle children sometimes, and if my sister is watching this, she will laugh. I sometimes am the oldest child. And not sometimes, most of the time, the oldest child. I take on that role. She doesn't always like it, but that's something that we have non-traditionally switch roles sometimes. So I'm a middle child. I love Charlotte, North Carolina, but I am an Oxon Hill, Maryland native, and I love Prince George's County where you are serving. And that's where I spent all of my formative years.
You know, and it's so funny, before we got on camera, I just said, because I've known you for several years and just never, I guess, remembered or recalled that you was from this area. I started my teaching career in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. So it's just so ironic that we've crossed our paths in many different ways, but not together. So I'm just really excited and just really ready to dive in to really talk about leadership. As you mentioned, CMS is divided into areas, and you serve as a community administrator for two of the areas. And so professional development is one of your key areas that you serve. Talk a little bit about the importance of developing professionally for the stakeholders that you serve.
Well, it's extremely important to professionally develop, and that's something that I do for myself so that I can stay abreast of current processes and practices up and coming based on research. Because as professionals, how can we support students in growing if we don't grow ourselves, if we are not models for teaching and learning? And so if I'm not a lifelong learner, how can I support students and encourage them to do the same? And so professional development is very important, and it is one of the key levers, one of the key functions that I perform in my role, again, supporting school leaders, assistant principals, deans of students, other district personnel, and collaborating with them to make sure that they remain abreast of current processes and up and coming processes, protocols, and research-based decision-making items.
And one of the things that I saw in your bio is that you work with restorative practices. And that is one thing that a lot of school districts, a lot of schools are moving towards. And so talk to us a little bit about your role in implementing restorative practices in CMS.
Sure. I'm so excited about restorative practices within Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And I did see that you had Kelvin Oliver, and I'm really excited about the work that he's doing in Texas and nationally with restorative practices. Within Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, about 2 to 3 years ago, we actually took hold of the tenets of restorative practices and partnered with the International Institute for Restorative Practices in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, so that we could develop a train-the-trainer model. And I was one of the trainers who was trained to implement the practices within the schools. And we began with a pilot program, a small cohort of schools of less than 10 schools, and it's grown over the last several years. Some schools are whole school change models where we are providing professional development and support over the course of 3 years. And then we have some other schools who are just taking part in the professional development as it relates to specific areas of restorative practices that they would like support in. But we do see it as a key lever in decreasing our out-of-school suspension rates and keeping our students within the classrooms learning in Charlotte-Mecklenburg.
Absolutely. And I had the pleasure of having our state's attorney for Prince George's County on my live in studio show. She's running for county executive for Prince George's County, but one of her initiatives that she talked about really will help us, and as she put it, know when to lift our students or when to lock our students up. And I think that's very important because to me, that really speaks to the restorative practice whole initiative and finding those key components to help our students, because we know that the school to prison pipeline is a real thing. And it is us, as far as leadership goes, it's our due diligence to try to stop that pipeline. That's a pipeline that we do not want to continue. So in CMS, a very large school district, which I love, by the way. Again, that was my home, my first stop as a career educator. But in CMS, can you talk a little bit about your efforts in reaching our students that are at risk, our students that may have a little difficulty staying in school? Because I'm sure in the midst of all of your professional development with leaders, that has to come across your plate as well.
Absolutely. And that is at the top of my list for my passion in my work as an educator. And so in my role as a learning community administrator, I primarily and historically, the role was to facilitate the discipline team meeting process, which is a hearing of sorts when students actually violate higher level code of student conduct rules. And so through that, and I want to tie it into the restorative practices, I have the opportunity not only to facilitate the hearing, but to talk with students and their parents, because key components of restorative practices, the tenets include doing things with students and not just to them and for them. It's about being with them. And so in addition, their parents. So through the discipline team meeting process, I have the opportunity not only just to talk about the code of student conduct, and restorative practices does not excuse misbehavior. And so I think that is a misconception by a lot of people, that it doesn't hold students accountable, there are no consequences, but what it does is it loops back around and rebuilds relationships. Once a harm occurs, and the victim could be the school, the victim could be an actual person, the victim could be a grade level. There are many different types of victim, but through restorative practices in my work, it allows me the opportunity to connect the students with valuable resources within the schools and within the community. So then when they return to the school, if that is the consequence, then there's an opportunity for sustainable behavior change. And so I feel very proud and very passionate about that part of the work.
I'm sure you do, because it's so impactful, the work that has to be done in that arena. So talk to me now a little bit about the efforts in, I'm sure you service Title I schools, our low poverty communities. They're in every school district, as large as both districts. We're both a Wallace district, won the award, the grant. Yeah. And so a lot of that, those funds really came with leadership development, basically. But in the midst of that, you have, while you are assisting assistant principals, while you're assisting principals, you have that climate culture piece that you have to help instill, especially in novice leaders. That's one of the challenges that new leaders face when they go into a building, is establishing that culture and that climate. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe the efforts that you or the district is doing to help leaders, and not just novice leaders, but especially novice leaders, establish that culture that's conducive for teaching and learning?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges that I would say is actually defining climate and defining culture. Sometimes people use them interchangeably when they are two completely separate things, with climate being how you feel when you walk into the building. How research supports that a positive school climate supports positive school culture, the development of shared ideas and values. And so first defining the difference between those things is very important. Having the opportunity, again, looping back around to the professional development opportunities, and also the shoulder to shoulder time that I have sitting down with school leaders in their school buildings, which is the most powerful, because coming to the professional development center and sitting in professional development with 45, 50, 100 people, you may not feel comfortable enough to share your fears, your concerns, your worries related to climate and culture. But sitting down shoulder to shoulder in school buildings is a great opportunity that I have in my role in walking the buildings to talk about climate and culture with those school leaders and providing real-time coaching and observation and feedback.
I love it. I love it. And so your background is counseling, and I know that all of those skills and that knowledge of counseling has really come into play with what you're doing now. How has that really impacted your practice in leadership?
So I always informally call myself a counseling administrator, and I promised myself professionally that I would never, ever lose my counseling skills. And so again, it gives me the opportunity, not only within my practice, but to model for other school leaders when interacting with students and parents. We often, in 99.9% of the time, I want to say 100% of the time, we know the what, and that's the outward behaviors of the students, what the students have done. This is why the student has a referral, but typically we don't delve into the why, the root cause. And so my counseling background allows me to have the skills and the knowledge to ask the relevant questions as to why and to delve deeper, because if we don't ask the why and we just assign consequences, then what's going to happen? The student is going to return and the same behavior is going to occur again. There's not going to be a sustainable behavior change. And the suspension will just serve as a respite for the teachers and the staff, and the student will return and the same thing, the cycle will begin again.
Absolutely. Whew, I tell you.
With my counseling background, that gives me an opportunity. Root cause.
Absolutely, absolutely. I tell you, and I really can tell that you take your position very seriously. You're very passionate about what it is that you do. What's next for Robin?
What's next for me? Again, I know that it's very important to continue to professionally develop myself so that I can be the best Robin that I can be for the students and staff of Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. But then on the other end, and I know that you're going to talk to me about this, I have a dream, like Martin Luther King, but I have a dream that I'm going to write a series of children's books based on resiliency and hope. And so I already have kind of my outline of what the series will entail. And so that is what I'm looking at next. And then in continuing my speaking inside and outside of the school district and professional development. But the authorship, that is my next big thing.
What was your next big thing?
The authorship, becoming a
okay,
yes.
That's closer than you know. So so we'll definitely get you on the road to that. Exactly. And so this is Leadership Matters. And as I always ask my guests, why, in your opinion, does leadership matters?
So leadership matters to me because I think about Jim Collins in Good to Great when he talked about that in order to move a good organization into greatness, it only takes one poor leader to move an organization backwards, but it takes many to move it forward. So leadership matters. If you don't have a good leader, if you're not a good leader, then why are you in that position? All you're going to do is impede and hinder the organization. So leadership matters. Good, great leadership matters, so that everybody will be working in tandem to meet the organizational goals.
Absolutely. And what would be a final message to administrators? My client, as you will, my target audience are novice leaders, new principals, new assistant principals. And so what would be your message, as you have helped many throughout your career? What would be your message to our new administrators in the school district?
So my message would be that relationships are the building block for strong organization. There is someone that I would like to quote who was one of the most humble, wisest people that I've ever met, and he is the late Bishop Dr. S.C. Madison, and he said that you don't have to treat everyone alike, but you have to treat them right. And that leads back around to my hashtag, relationships are key. That is very important to build relationships, building relationships not only with your students, because typically that's what we think of, building relationships with your staff, your faculty and staff, building relationships with your parents in the building, building relationships with the community. And so once you have those positive relationships, then impactful teaching and learning will occur in your building and you'll achieve your goals.
I tell you, I thank you, Robin Y. Green. You have been such a gracious guest on Leadership Matters, so knowledgeable and passionate about the work. And that's what I love. So thank you for taking your evening and being a guest on Leadership Matters.
Thank you, Dr. Sharon. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I definitely cannot wait to collaborate with you further. As I said, we have a parallel line here that we're going to have to further explore. So I definitely appreciate it. And the viewers, the listeners, I thank you so much for joining us live. And those of you who are going to catch the replay, I want to thank you as well. And as always, remember, leadership matters.